How did you meet the woman of your dreams? This woman I delivered pizza to pulled up at the gas station and slipped me a $1,000 gift coupon to Chili's to come to her house while her ex picked up their daughter. She said she needed a witness while she packed because Mike had a temper and she was scared to be alone with him. Carla explained Mike had never hit her in front of Lynn, but he'd choked her, thrown her downstairs, and held a knife to her throat when she tried to leave. She'd been trying to escape for months, but every time she tried, he'd explode and she'd back down. All I had to do was stand by the door, pretend to help move furniture, and call 911 if Mike got violent. He completely alienated her from all her friends, so there was no one else she could ask. She promised he'd be there at 2:30 and it would be over by 2:45. I needed the money and figured nothing too bad could happen during a custody exchange. Mike arrived 10 minutes early. He was bigger than I expected, the kind of guy who had knife scars and a permanent scowl. He kissed Lynn's head and she pulled away. The first sign something was wrong. His friend stayed by the truck, arms crossed, staring at the windows like he was keeping watch. I stood by the door and pretended to move boxes while positioning myself so I could see them through the window. Carla started talking in this measured voice she'd probably practiced 100 times, and my stomach tightened, knowing what was coming. At first, Mike laughed like she was joking, but when Carla kept insisting Lynn's bag was packed, his smile disappeared completely. He reached down and grabbed Lynn's backpack, not hard enough to make her cry out, but I could see her stumbling. "This isn't enough for a weekend," he said loud enough that the neighbor looked over. Carla pulled Lynn back and kept talking, saying something about having everything she needs, and Mike's jaw started doing this twitching thing. I found myself gripping my phone harder, ready to move if he grabbed them again. Mike told Lynn to wait in the vehicle without asking her. She ran past Mike's friend, who was now leaning against the truck bed, cigarette in hand, eyes never leaving the house. As soon as Lynn was gone, he leaned forward and started talking fast and low, but I could only catch pieces. "5 years. Everything I've done. You can't just..." His hands were moving wildly, and he knocked over the welcome mat, then a potted plant, then punched the siding. The vinyl cracked and he pulled his hand back, laughing, flexing his fingers, then went right back to that intense whisper. The rapid mood switch scared me more than if he'd just stayed angry. Carla tried to step back inside, but Mike grabbed the door frame and held it open, still smiling like they were having a normal conversation. My phone was already in my hand with 911 pre-dialed, my thumb hovering over the call button. Part of me wanted to intervene right then or just get the hell out of there, but I kept thinking about Chili's and how Carla had specifically said to wait unless he got violent. But watching her trapped there, trying to close the door while he held it open, made me feel like a coward for not stepping in. Mike was getting louder now, saying, "Who is he? Just tell me who he is," over and over while Carla kept saying there was nobody else. Mike pushed inside suddenly, and the door hit the wall with a crash that made everyone jump, including me. He stepped back out, laughing, apologizing to the air, then walked right back to the doorway and grabbed both sides of the frame. To anyone else, it would have looked casual, but I could see her backing down the hallway, and him not letting her close the door. My whole body was tense, ready to spring up, but I kept remembering Carla's instructions to stay invisible unless absolutely necessary. "We're going to work this out," he said louder now, "because you love me and I love you, and that's what people who love each other do." His friend started walking over, but Mike saw him coming and let go of the door frame, putting his palms up like he was surrendering. Sorry, just having a passionate discussion with my wife," he said, and his friend hesitated. That's when Carla said clearly, "I'm not your wife anymore," and Mike's face went completely blank, like she'd hit a switch. He stepped inside slowly this time, deliberately, and walked toward the living room where I could see the packed boxes. She pressed herself against the wall as he leaned down to look at the labels, his hand on her shoulder, holding her there. I started to move because this was it. This was the moment I was supposed to protect her, but he must have sensed the movement because his head snapped up, and he looked right at me through the window. Not a glance, but a real look like he was memorizing my face. My blood went cold. "You need something?" he asked me, his voice weirdly calm. I said, "No, just helping move these boxes." But he kept staring. Then he looked at Carla, back at me, and I saw it click in his eyes. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it as he walked to the door, slow, both hands visible, but somehow that made it worse. He pushed it open and stood in the doorway like we were old friends about to catch up. "You're with her, aren't you?" he said quietly, leaning forward. "How much did she pay you to play hero?" He shifted his weight, and I saw the outline of something tucked in his waistband. My mouth went completely dry, and I couldn't get any words out for what felt like forever, but was probably only 2 or 3 seconds. The weight of my phone in my pocket felt like a brick, and I realized I still had 911 on the line through my earbuds that I'd put in earlier. My hand started moving toward my pocket real slow, and Mike's eyes tracked the movement, his own hand shifting closer to whatever was tucked in his waistband. Before he could say anything else, I hit the unmute button through my pocket and said loud enough for the dispatcher to hear that I was just helping Carla move some furniture for her custody exchange at 2:30. Mike's eyes got narrow, and he tilted his head like he was trying to figure out if I was stupid or playing some kind of game. His hand moved another inch toward his waistband, and I saw the handle of what looked like a knife sticking out. Behind him, his friend flicked his cigarette onto the driveway and started walking over, cracking his knuckles as he came. The sound made my skin crawl. Movement across the street caught my eye, and I saw the neighbor who'd been watching earlier come out onto their porch with their phone held up in that obvious way people do when they're recording. Mike must have noticed me looking because he turned his head slightly and saw the neighbor too. His whole body language changed in an instant, going from threatening to this fake, reasonable divorced dad just trying to pick up his kid. He stepped back from the doorway with both hands visible and spread out like he was showing he meant no harm, but his eyes stayed locked on mine with this look that said we weren't done. Carla took that moment to step forward from behind the door frame with a manila folder in her shaking hands, saying something about the custody schedule being all written out. Mike snatched the papers from her so fast she flinched backward into the house, almost tripping over the threshold. He started flipping through them rough enough that one page tore at the corner. From the truck, Lynn started crying and hitting the horn over and over, the sound cutting through everything else. She was yelling for her mom between the honks, and I could see her little hands banging on the steering wheel. Mike's friend jogged back to the truck to try to calm her down, but she just got louder, screaming that she wanted mommy. The dispatcher's voice came quiet through my earbud, asking if I needed officers immediately. I coughed twice real quick for yes, trying to make it look natural. She said units were already heading our way, maybe 3 minutes out, 4 at most. Mike was still looking at the papers, but I could tell he wasn't really reading them because his eyes weren't moving across the lines. He started arguing that these weren't official custody papers because they didn't have the right court stamp and the date was wrong and a bunch of other stuff that sounded made up. He was buying time, trying to find some loophole, while his friend kept Lynn in the truck even though she was getting more and more upset. The neighbor started walking across the street toward us, still recording, calling out to ask if everything was okay here. Mike's friend immediately left the truck and intercepted him on the sidewalk, getting right in his face about privacy and property lines and how it was illegal illegal to record without permission. The neighbor tried to step around him, but Mike's friend moved to block him again, their voices getting louder. I used the distraction to lean toward Carla and tell her quiet as I could to get her important documents and medications right now, while Mike was looking at the papers. She nodded and started backing further into the house, but Mike's head snapped up and he followed her inside before I could do anything. The door swung wide, and I could see straight into the living room where all the packed boxes were stacked against the wall. Mike walked right past them at first, then stopped and turned back to look at the labels. Each one had an address written in black marker that wasn't this house. He grabbed Carla's wrist and pulled her over to look at them with him. She tried to pull away, but he held on, not hard enough to leave marks, but firm enough that she couldn't get free. I stepped inside too, keeping my distance but making sure they could both see me. Mike started reading the address out loud, asking whose place this was, who she was moving in with. Was this the guy she'd been seeing behind his back? Carla kept saying there was nobody else. She was just getting her own place, but Mike wasn't listening. Why does Mike keep asking who is he when there's literally no sign of another man except the pizza guy helping her move? Something tells me this control thing runs way deeper than just jealousy. He seems more upset about losing his grip. He kicked one of the boxes and it split open, clothes spilling out onto the floor. Lynn's crying from the truck was getting desperate now, and even Mike's friend was having trouble with a neighbor, their argument getting physical with some pushing and shoving. I could hear sirens in the distance, still faint, but definitely coming this way. Mike heard them too because his whole body tensed up and he let go of Carla's wrist. He looked at me, then at her, then back at me, and I saw him putting it together that I'd called the cops. His face went from angry to this weird calm that was way scarier. He walked toward me slow, hands at his sides, but I could see his fingers twitching. The sirens were getting louder, and Mike's friend was yelling something about needing to go, but Mike kept coming toward me until we were maybe 3 feet apart. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the cigarettes on his breath and said something about how I didn't know what I'd just started. I stepped right into his path and pointed at the heavy dresser near the wall, blocking him from going deeper into the house. He shoved me hard and my shoulder hit the doorframe with a crack that made my teeth rattle. Through the phone still pressed to my ear, I could hear the dispatcher typing fast, asking if I was okay. Mike leaned over me and said, I better watch myself since he knew where I worked from the pizza deliveries. His friend was already walking around my car with his phone out, taking pictures of my license plate and the pizza shop decal on the door. The sirens were getting real close now, and Mike's whole body changed when he heard them. He stepped back from me and smoothed down his shirt, then walked toward the street with his hands visible at his sides. 2 police cars pulled up with their lights flashing, but no sirens, and Mike was already walking toward them with his concerned look on his face. He started talking loud about just wanting to see his daughter and how Carla was keeping Lynn from him. The officers got out slow and careful, one walking toward Mike while another came straight to where Carla and I were standing by the door. A third officer went to the truck where Lynn was still sitting with Mike's friend. They separated us all right away, the first officer taking Mike down to the sidewalk while the second stayed with us on the porch. I could see Lynn crying through the truck window as the third officer talked to her through the open door. The officer with us asked what happened, and I told him quick about the weapon I saw in Mike's waistband and how he threatened me. The officer nodded and wrote it down, but said without actually seeing the weapon, they couldn't search him unless he agreed to it. Mike was already shaking his head when they asked, knowing exactly what his rights were. He started telling his own story to the officer, talking calm and clear about how Carla was unstable and had hired some stranger to intimidate him during his custody time. The way he talked made him sound so reasonable, like he was just a concerned dad trying to see his kid. The neighbor from across the street came walking over with his phone in his hand, showing the officers something on the screen. I could see it was a video that caught Mike shoving me and some of the yelling from before. The officer thanked him and got his name and number for the report. Carla pulled out her phone and started showing the officers pictures of old bruises on her arms and neck, plus text messages from Mike that said things I couldn't fully hear, but made the officer's face get serious. They took pictures of everything with their own phones and wrote down dates, but the officer explained this was evidence for family court, not enough to arrest Mike today without him actually hitting someone right now. That's when Lynn's small voice carried across the yard, telling the officer that Daddy hurts Mommy sometimes. Mike's face went red, but he kept his mouth shut, just staring at the ground while everyone heard what she said. The officers talked among themselves for a minute, then came back and said they were establishing a civil standby. Carla would have 30 minutes to pack essential items while they supervised to keep the peace. Mike had to stay by the street, but I could see him pull out his phone and start recording everything. The officer told me I could go, but suggested I stay as a witness in case anything else happened. Carla went inside and started grabbing clothes and stuffing them in bags, while one officer stood in the doorway watching both her and Mike. I helped carry boxes to her car, keeping my head down but feeling Mike's eyes on me the whole time. His friend was still by the truck, smoking another cigarette and shaking his head like this was all some big joke. Every few minutes Mike would call out something about his rights or how this was kidnapping, but the officers just told him to stay calm and let her pack. Carla moved fast, grabbing photo albums and important papers from a desk drawer, Lynn's favorite stuffed animals, medicine from the bathroom cabinet. She kept looking at the clock on the wall, trying to get everything she could before time ran out. The officer checking his watch said she had 10 more minutes. Mike started pacing by the street, still recording, talking into his phone about parental alienation and false accusations. I carried another box past him, and he stepped closer to the property line but didn't cross it. The officer watching him just shifted position slightly, ready to intervene if needed. Carla came out with 2 more bags, and I could see her hands shaking as she loaded them in the trunk. She whispered something to the officer about being scared Mike would follow her. The officer said they could escort her to a safe location, but couldn't prevent Mike from going wherever he wanted after that, as long as he didn't violate any existing orders. Time was up, and the officers started wrapping things up, giving both Carla and Mike information about getting copies of the report. I rushed back inside to help Carla grab whatever she could, while we still had police protection. She ran to Lynn's room first and started pulling clothes from drawers into a plastic bag, while I grabbed toys from the floor. Mike was out on the street now, yelling about lawyers and custody violations loud enough that neighbors were coming out to watch. His friend stayed by my car with his phone out, taking pictures of my license plate and walking around to get different angles. Carla's hands were shaking so bad, she dropped a bottle of medicine twice before I took it from her and shoved it in the bag. We moved to her bedroom where she pulled papers from a filing cabinet and stuffed them in a backpack without even looking at what they were. Mike kept shouting about how we'd both be hearing from his attorney and how he had rights as a father. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that just said, "Reply blue if safe to leave when officers go," and I realized it was from the dispatcher checking on us. I typed back blue even though my fingers were shaking, and I definitely didn't feel safe at all. The officer at the door called out that we had 5 more minutes, and Carla started moving faster, grabbing photo albums and Lynn's favorite stuffed bear. Mike walked up to the officers, and I could hear hear him saying I'd attacked him, and he wanted to file charges against me for assault. The officer told him the video didn't show that, but they'd include his statement in their report if he wanted to make one. Carla managed to fill 2 suitcases and a cardboard box with Lynn's things before the officer said time was up. Mike immediately started waving papers at them, saying it was his custody weekend, and he had the right to take Lynn now. The officers looked at the paperwork while Carla kept saying Lynn wasn't safe with him and begging them not to let him take her. They told her the custody order was valid, and she'd need to file for an emergency protective order at the courthouse first thing Monday morning. Mike's friend walked over to the truck and came back with Lynn, who'd been waiting inside the whole time. The second Lynn saw her mom, she ran over and wrapped herself around Carla's leg, crying and saying she didn't want to go. The officers kept saying they couldn't override a valid custody order without a judge's ruling, and my chest felt tight watching this happen. Mike walked over and picked Lynn up while she went completely limp like a rag doll in his arms. He looked right at Carla and said this wasn't over, then turned to stare at me with that same cold look from earlier. Lynn was sobbing as he carried her to the truck and buckled her into the car seat while his friend got in the driver's side. The truck pulled away, and Carla just collapsed on the porch steps, crying harder than I'd ever seen anyone cry before. The officers gave her some papers about the women's shelter and told her exactly which forms to file at the courthouse for protective orders. One of them pulled me aside and said I should be careful for a while and maybe stay somewhere else tonight. He said to vary my routes home and watch for anyone following me, then handed me his card with the case number written on it. They got in their cars and drove off, leaving me and Carla sitting on her porch with boxes and bags scattered around us. I helped her load everything into her car, and she said she was going to her sister's place 2 towns over. She hugged me and kept apologizing for getting me involved, but I told her it wasn't her fault and to just focus on getting Lynn back safely. I drove home taking a different route than usual, checking my mirrors constantly and feeling jumpy every time a car stayed behind me too long. When I got to my apartment complex, I sat in my car for a few minutes, watching to make sure nobody had followed me. Everything seemed normal, so I went inside and tried to calm down by watching TV, but I couldn't focus on anything. Mike's friend taking pictures of my car and plate feels really calculated. There's something unsettling about how prepared they seem for this exact situation, like they've done this routine before. Around 8 that night, my phone rang 3 times from blocked numbers, but nobody said anything when I answered. I figured it was just coincidence until I went outside to check my mail and found a photo tucked under my windshield wiper. It was a picture of my apartment building taken from the parking lot, and you could see my apartment number clearly on the door. My blood went cold because the message was obvious, and there was no doubt who'd put it there. I grabbed the photo and went back inside, locking the deadbolt and putting a chair against the door, even though I knew that wouldn't really stop anyone. I called the officer whose card I had but got voicemail, so I left a message about the photo and the blocked calls. I stayed up most of the night jumping at every sound in the hallway and checking out the window every time a car pulled into the parking lot. Around 6 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Carla saying she was at a motel with Lynn and asking if I'd still file a witness statement for the protective order she wanted to get. I texted back yes, even though I was starting to wonder what I'd gotten myself into with this whole mess. The next morning, I drove to the police station and sat in a small room with Sergeant Derek Mercer, who took down everything I'd seen at Carla's house. He wrote it all down and had me sign it, but told me harassment was hard to prove without direct threats, and the photo on my car probably wasn't enough for charges. While I was there, dispatcher Chris Montoya called my phone and said she was helping connect Carla with shelter services and legal aid, and wanted to explain what the protective order process would look like. She said the judge would look at my statement along with Carla's history and might grant a temporary order, but Mike would get a chance to fight it at a hearing in a couple weeks. That afternoon, I got to work, and my manager pulled me aside saying he'd gotten an angry call about one of his employees harassing customers at their homes, and my hours were being cut from 30 to 15 a week starting immediately. I knew it was Mike, but couldn't prove it and needed the job too much to argue about it. 3 days later, Carla called to say she'd filed for the temporary protective order with my statement attached, and the judge had granted it for 2 weeks until they could have a full hearing. She sounded relieved, but also scared because Mike would have to be served with the papers, and she knew he'd lose it when that happened. The next day, 2 officers went to Mike's workplace to serve him the order in front of his coworkers, and within 3 hours, Carla got a text from a number she didn't recognize saying she'd regret this, and he'd make sure she paid for embarrassing him like that. She showed it to the police, but they said without proof it was Mike, there wasn't much they could do about it. The next custody exchange was scheduled for the parking lot of the police station, with an officer watching, and I sat in my car across the lot to be another witness just in case. Mike pulled up in his truck, and when he got out, he looked right at me and gave this slow smile that made my skin crawl before walking over to where Carla waited with Lynn. During the exchange, Lynn ran to Carla and wrapped her arms around her mom's legs, crying that she didn't want to go, but the officer explained the protective order didn't change the custody agreement and she had to go with her dad. Mike picked Lynn up while she was still crying, and as he walked past Carla, he leaned in close and whispered something that made her whole body go stiff, but the officer was too far away to hear what he said. That night, I got home from my shortened shift and found my rear tire slashed with a long cut that went all the way through the rubber. I called the police, and they came out to take a report, but my apartment complex didn't have cameras in the parking lot, and without witnesses or video, there was nothing they could really do except add it to the file. The next week, Carla called to tell me she and Lynn were going into a women's shelter that had strict security rules, which meant Lynn would have to change schools in the middle of the year, and Carla couldn't work because the shelter location had to stay secret. She said the safety was worth it, but I could hear in her voice how much it was costing them to have to hide like this just to get away from Mike. I went to the hardware store that same day and bought a doorbell camera for $60. The guy at the counter showed me how to install it using just my phone. Back home, I screwed it into the wall next to my door and tested it 5 times. Then I ordered a dash cam online and paid extra for overnight shipping. I started parking in different spots at work and taking 3 different routes home. Some nights I'd drive past my apartment twice before pulling in. I moved my bed away from the window and kept a baseball bat next to it. The Chili's gift card sat in my kitchen drawer underneath old receipts. Every time I saw it, my stomach turned because it felt like I'd taken money to watch someone get hurt. 2 weeks later, I had to testify at the protective order hearing downtown. I wore my only dress shirt and sat in the hallway for 2 hours before they called me. Mike's lawyer stood up and asked if I'd been paid to be at Carla's house that day. I said no, which was technically true since the gift card wasn't really payment. He asked if I knew Carla before that day, and I said no, again. Then he asked why a stranger would help someone move furniture for free. The judge cut him off and asked me to describe what I saw. I told him about Mike grabbing the door frame and not letting Carla close it. I mentioned him pushing inside and the door hitting the wall. Mike's lawyer kept objecting, but the judge let me finish. When I stepped down, Mike stared at me the whole walk back to my seat. The judge extended the protective order for 6 months, but said Mike could have supervised visits with Lynn. That meant Carla had to pay $150 every week for the visitation center. Mike showed up to every single visit, according to what Carla told me later. His friend would sit in the parking lot the whole time, smoking and watching who came and went. The center had cameras, but the parking lot didn't, so he could sit there legally. I started noticing Mike's truck more often after that. Once it was parked across from my work when I got off my shift. Another time it drove past slowly while I was walking to my car. I told my manager, but she said lots of people have black trucks. My coworkers started avoiding me because I kept checking the windows. I knew Mike was trying to make me paranoid, and it was working. Carla called me from a blocked number to say she'd found a job at a warehouse. She had to use a fake name because Mike kept calling places she applied to. He'd tell them she was unstable or had a criminal record. The shelter helped her create a whole safety plan with code words and escape routes. She had to memorize 3 different ways to get to safe locations from her job. Living in constant fear was becoming her normal life now. 3 weeks after the hearing, I was pumping gas when Mike's friend walked up behind me. He stood so close I could smell the cigarettes on his jacket. He said Mike wanted me to know he was a patient man who never forgot faces. Then he bought a pack of gum and left before I could even process what happened. My hands shook so bad I couldn't get the gas cap back on. I drove straight to the police station and filed a report about the encounter. The officer typed everything up but said without actual threats of violence, it was just documentation. Sergeant Mercer came out and suggested I think about moving to another town. That felt like letting Mike win, but I was starting to understand why people just disappeared sometimes. Carla's lawyer filed for full custody based on the protective order and Lynn's statements to a counselor. The counselor said Lynn was showing signs of trauma and fear around her father. Mike's lawyer immediately filed a counter motion claiming parental alienation. He demanded psychological evaluations for both Carla and Lynn. Each evaluation would cost $500 that Carla didn't have. The legal bills kept growing while Mike's parents paid for his attorney. They even hired a private investigator to follow Carla and document any mistakes she made. The system that was supposed to protect them was draining every penny Carla had saved. She had to choose between groceries and lawyer fees some weeks. I was at the grocery store one evening buying frozen dinners when I saw Mike in the cereal aisle. He started following me, staying exactly 1 aisle behind. When I went to produce, he went to bakery right next to it. When I headed to checkout, he got in line at customer service. I left my cart full of food and walked out. The security guard asked if everything was okay, but I just kept walking. He said he couldn't do anything unless Mike actually did something threatening. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before driving home, checking my mirrors the whole way. 3 weeks later, Carla called me crying because Lynn was waking up screaming every night and wouldn't go to the school without checking the parking lot for Mike's truck first. The school counselor said Lynn needed therapy, but Carla's insurance only covered 10 sessions, and the therapist wanted to see her twice a week for at least 6 months. I helped her look for sliding scale places, but the wait lists were all 3 months long, and Lynn was pulling out her own hair during class. Carla had to leave work 4 times that month when the school called about Lynn hiding under her desk or refusing to come out of the bathroom. Her boss started making comments about reliability, and Carla couldn't afford to lose another job. 4 months after everything went down, I got a text from Carla that just said he showed up at her school. Something about this whole protective order system seems broken when Mike can just have his friend deliver veiled threats at gas stations while technically staying legal. The fact that Carla needs fake names for job applications while Mike's parents fund his legal games makes me wonder who this system actually protects. Mike had walked right into the main office claiming there was a mix-up about pickup times, even though he didn't have custody that week. The principal called the police, but Mike left before they arrived, and all he got was a warning letter from the prosecutor's office since he technically didn't make contact with Carla. The school put his picture at the front desk, but couldn't legally ban him from the property since he was still Lynn's father with partial visitation rights. That's when I decided to move across town because if Mike was bold enough to show up at Lynn's school, he'd definitely come looking for me. I found a studio apartment 40 minutes away and switched from pizza delivery to warehouse work where nobody would know my schedule or route. The deposit and first month cleaned out my savings, and I had to sell my PlayStation to cover the moving truck. My new place was smaller and the commute was killing me on gas, but at least I could sleep without wondering if Mike was sitting outside. Carla finally got partial custody back, but the judge ordered all exchanges to happen at the police station, which meant driving 20 minutes each way every other Friday and Sunday. Mike would show up exactly on time and use Lynn to pass messages like telling her to ask mommy why she was being so mean to daddy, or giving her drawings he made of their old house with our real home written on them. Lynn would cry the whole drive back, and Carla couldn't say anything bad about Mike because the custody evaluator warned her about parental alienation. 6 months in, the protective order was up for renewal, which meant another day off work Carla couldn't afford, and another $50 filing fee she had to borrow from her sister. The hearing got postponed twice because Mike's lawyer had scheduling conflicts, and when they finally got in front of the judge, Mike argued he'd been following all the rules so the order wasn't necessary anymore. The judge renewed it for another year, but reduced it from no contact to peaceful contact for co-parenting purposes, which basically meant Mike could text and email about Lynn as much as he wanted. That's when the real harassment started, but in ways that were impossible to prove. Strange cars would park outside Carla's apartment for hours, but leave before police arrived. She'd get hang-up calls from different numbers all night long, but when she changed her number, they started again within a week. Her workplace started getting 1-star reviews online, talking about terrible service from that blonde woman, even though Carla had brown hair and worked in the back office. Someone kept signing her up for dating sites and mortgage quotes, and her email got so flooded with spam she had to abandon it. The police said without proof it was Mike, there was nothing they could do. I started checking my own locks 3 times before bed and installed a doorbell camera even though my landlord said I'd lose my deposit for drilling holes. Every time I saw a truck that looked like Mike's, my chest would tighten up and I'd have to pull over until my hands stopped shaking. 7 months after that day at Carla's house, I drove past a Chili's on my way to work and just kept going even though I was hungry and had that gift card sitting in my glove box. The $1,000 wasn't worth what I'd learned about how the system worked or didn't work for people like Carla who just wanted to be safe. She was doing everything right, following every rule, showing up to every hearing, documenting everything, and Mike was still finding ways to control her life. Some nights I'd lie awake thinking about that moment he saw me through the window and wonder if he was still watching, still waiting for the right moment to make good on whatever he was planning. Being a witness doesn't end when you leave the scene because you carry that weight with you everywhere, checking your mirrors, avoiding certain places, knowing that some people never really escape no matter how many protective orders they file, or how far they move, or how many locks they install on their doors. Thanks for letting me dive into all these questions with you today. It's always interesting wondering about this stuff together. Catch you next time, and if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.